Another live issue in many countries is the practice of female head coverings. These vary quite a lot by country. The one you're most likely to see in Western countries is the hijab, the simplest one here. The most infamous of them is the burqa, which covers every body part. You don't even see the eyes. They just have to peer through a kind of mesh. Second most restrictive would be the niqab, where you only see the eyes. What does the Quran say about this? Well, it requires female modesty, that one not show off one's attractiveness. Insofar as that goes, that's not unusual. Our culture in current-day America and Western Europe is quite unusual in this respect. We tend to take the attitude that if you've got it, flaunt it, with some restrictions. Maybe you shouldn't flaunt it in school, but you flaunt it on Friday and Saturday night, at least when there are no children around. That's atypical of world cultures. Usually modesty requirements are more restrictive than that. The Quran also requires that Muhammad's wives should cover their hair. And that's what most of these are doing, right? They're covering the hair, although that one's covering part of the face and this one's covering all of it. And that was a fairly common requirement in the ancient world. You did see Jews and Christians practicing similar things. Now, if Muhammad's wives have to cover their hair, so what? What does that have to do with us now? Well, this is where the legal rulings come in. Was that meant to be a requirement for all Muslim women, that Muhammad's wives are setting the standard and the example for that? Or are they held to a higher standard because they're the wives of the messenger of God? Well, Muslims disagree about this. Someone who's written about this is Rana Kabbani, who was born in 1958. She's a Syrian born in Damascus, Syria, but she was educated at the American University in Beirut, Lebanon, and then later at Cambridge University in the UK. Growing up in Syria, she remembers that women would wear the hijab when out in public, but as soon as they got into their home or were only with other women, they would quickly take it off. It's when you're in mixed-sex groups where the men aren't family that you had to be veiled. Earlier in the 20th century, both male and female non-traditionalists, or you could say liberals, agreed that Western traditions and styles of dress should be adopted. This was the way to get past colonial rule. So as many nations were asserting their national identity, they said to themselves, let's move into the modern world, and let's modernize our habits of dress. Head coverings were seen as outdated, but things in many countries have changed quite a bit. She says that since the 1980s, quote, the hijab is no longer seen as a symbol of an archaic tradition. Rather, it has become a striking affirmation of identity, religious, cultural, political, reflecting the more radical feelings that now prevail, end quote. It's kind of like flying a flag or wearing a t-shirt with a message on it. It's an unmistakable proclamation of what your culture is and what your religion is. And nowadays, many traditional Muslim women view it as a sign of piety, a sign of dedication to God, that they're willing to even cover up this much. They're willing to be, from a Western perspective, extra modest. People in the West, and especially feminists, usually see the hijab as something imposed on women by men. They see it as a visible sign and a means of oppression of women by the men. Rana Kabbani doesn't see it that way, nor do most moderate to traditional Muslim women who cover their hair. They think it's our culture that's nutty. They think that modesty protects and serves women. It's generally speaking the women who persuade other women to adopt this practice. Things have changed since the early 20th century. Independence and emulation of the West seems to have not worked. Much of the Islamic world is poor, somewhat unfree, and powerless relative to other nations. There's a lot of corruption and repression in different countries. Rana Kabbani says that wearing the hijab is a political choice, just as in former days removing it was a political choice. She says that wearing the hijab can be a liberation. It brings it about that women are not sexual objects, at least not to the same degree. She says that it enriches spiritual life, that it grants freedom from material occupations, and that it erases class differences, at least to some extent. Here's an analogy to help you understand it. The use of uniforms in Catholic schools. Teachers and principals and parents say it does a lot of these things. It keeps the students focused on their work, erases some of the differences between the rich and the poor. It keeps people from showing off their sexuality and gaining attention in that way. In some Western countries that have a much higher Muslim population than the United States, this has been a real political conflict. For instance, France has forbidden the use of female head coverings in their public schools. It says this is contrary to our culture. It's contrary to our traditional European and Christian values. And people reply, yeah, but this is religious freedom. This is what our religion requires. How can you stop us from doing this? It's another issue that'll come up again and again as Muslim people are integrated into multicultural societies. On this note of controversy, we end our survey of the Islamic tradition. Thanks for watching.